Everyone, welcome. We'll give people another minute or two to join, and then we'll start. Thank you for joining. Everyone, if you just joined, we're just giving people another minute, and then we'll start. Great. So I think we'll start, and I'm very happy to have this session today and talk about the latest report that we did together with Osterman Research. Called the State of the Identity Attack Surface. Really a very interesting report that looks at all the different gaps and issues around the identity security. And I'm very excited to have here today on this webinar with me, Michael Sampson, a principal analyst in Osterman Research, who've done this very interesting research analysis. So, hey, Michael, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, Hed, thank you.
And I think maybe we'll do quick introductions before we get started. And then we'll introduce the topic a little bit and talk about identity security and why it's important. What did we find in this report? So just as quick introduction, my name is Hed Kovetz. I'm the CEO and one of the founders at Silverfort. My background is in cybersecurity for many years, since I was 18. Started from the Israeli intelligence, 8200, where I was eventually a group leader managing 5 teams, and then worked as a product manager for different companies and did mostly projects for governments, building national cybersecurity architectures for a few countries. And then started this company, Silverfort, 7 years ago. Silverfort is a company where we provide unified identity security. So we really connect to all the silos of the identity infrastructure and apply protection across everything, even things that couldn't be protected before. But today we'll focus a bit less on that and talk a bit more broadly about the identity security landscape. And here with me, I'm very excited to have Michael Sampson from Osterman Research. Michael, if you can give a quick introduction of yourself, that would be great.
Thanks, Hed. I've worked with Mike Osterman at Osterman Research from around 2008, but from 2021 stepped into a full-time senior analyst role at Osterman and have recently taken over as the principal analyst for the company. It was a great privilege to work with Silverfort on the study around the identity attack service. And as Hed said, we're very excited to present this session to you today.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today and for the great work that you've done on this research report. I found it very interesting, and I'm excited to have a chance to show it to everyone here. I think that before we jump into the results, we'll do just a quick introduction of the motivation behind it. So I'll talk a bit about why did we want to do this research with Osterman, and then I'll let Michael explain what did they do. What was the methodology behind the research? As far as the motivation, I've been focused on identity security for many years now. That's the reason why I started this company, Silverfort. And I wanted to really get a full understanding of the identity attack surface as a whole, not just specific issues that people talk about here and there, but really understand the problem end to end. Identity attack surface is something that more and more companies are starting to realize is something that attackers are going after on almost every data breach. Sometimes it's the easiest way for an attacker to breach into a network or to spread inside the network is using compromised identities. And the identity attack surface is everything that includes those identities, credentials, and the different resources that you can access with them. When we talk about the threats here, we talk about things like account takeover, where you actually compromise an account, lateral movement, ransomware propagation. So the ways that you use compromised identities to move from one compromised account and one compromised device to the entire network, as we've seen in many data breaches. And when we talk about protecting the identity attack surface, we talk about doing it broadly, really in a holistic way, which includes all the different types of user accounts, covering both on-prem and cloud, and looking at all the different resources and access methods. So really thinking about identity security end to end, and not just about a specific application or a specific gateway, but really understanding the entire scope of identity as an attack surface as something that we need to secure. So, Michael,
and before you jump off that slide, Hed, the other thing that's probably worth just calling out on that is that phrase that says this is about legitimate credentials being used with malicious intent. One of the big challenges for organizations is that these are valid credentials that a user or a service account has been issued with or given, but they're used in a malicious way, and the ability to detect and stop that in real time is essential.
I completely agree. I think that for many years, companies talked about cybersecurity as protecting all the different ways that you can go kind of around the front door. And here we're talking about just walking into the front door as if you're one of the employees. It's very hard to even tell that you're not if you have valid credentials, which we all know are pretty easy to obtain today. It poses a great issue for companies. So we'll talk, and I already see some questions that we're getting from the audience about the techniques that are used to reduce that attack surface. We'll talk about it today. Before we jump into the conclusions and some of these recommendations, if you can tell us a bit about the methodology here, Michael, before we dive into the actual results, that would be great.
Thanks, Hed. So your team approached Osterman Research, and if you can move to the next slide for me, please, that would be great. We're a market research and consulting firm focused on delivering insight around topics like cybersecurity, information, and data protection. And in approaching us, you asked if we could do an in-depth survey into the identity attack surface. And the next slide shows what we did in terms of taking that survey to market. We surveyed 637 respondents across 6 countries. And Hed, you'll recall that when your team spoke to us, one of the critical things that was important for your team was to deal directly with the people who had the best understanding of identity security and the efficacy of those identity security products in organizations. And for that reason, we targeted the survey at the mid-level roles, the identity architect, the identity infrastructure manager, or the IAM manager or director. People in those sorts of roles were the focus for this rather than the higher level CISO roles. One of the other design requirements for this was that the respondents had to work at organizations with at least 1,000 employees. And across the 637 respondents, just under 70% worked at organizations of 1,000 to 2,500 employees, 21% in the 2,500 to 5,000, and 10% in the 5,000 and above. We put no industry restrictions or exclusions on the survey itself. On the next slide, we talk about the content focus of the survey, which was around the identity attack surface are for standard users, admin users, and surface accounts. And if you click again, the protections that we have for each of those different people types or the service account types. So for admin users, it's around privileged account management. For standard users, it's around multi-factor authentication. And for service accounts, it's around activity monitoring. And the critical thing to observe with each of those is that it's around real-time protections that work at the point of a breach or a malicious intent activity happening, that we are able to detect that and do something about it. On the next slide, you'll see the sorts of topics that we covered in the survey. We wanted to get first-hand input from mid-level professionals on identity security teams on how effective these solutions really were for them. For each of the solution types that we looked at, we wanted to understand the percentage of users that were protected, as well as the percentage of resources that were protected. And then in addition to that, we also wanted them to give an assessment of their confidence of the solutions that they had in place to deliver visibility into the attacks that they were seeing, as well as the ability to do things like detecting malicious access attempts and blocking malicious access attempts. Now, this assessment for confidence, or what we also called identity resilience, as we show on the next slide, was very important to the design of this, because synergistic deployments across the solutions that we looked at, that identity security teams are responsible for, should positively impact the level of confidence that is in place. It's not enough for organizations to have tools that are not delivering results. That's a bad deployment, and a deployment that needs to be worked on to deliver greater efficacy. We looked at several interrelated dimensions of confidence in the survey, and Hed and I will talk about some of those in a few minutes. But in order to give a high assessment of identity resilience, it requires real-time protections that actually work across the organization for the individuals, the users, and the resources that are affected. And on the final slide in this section, before we look at the results, I would just point you to the research report, The State of the Identity Attack Surface, Insights into Critical Protection Gaps, which you can get from the Silverfort website. Hed and I will be talking about some of the data in here, but you can get the full story in the report.
Great. Thank you for that. And I completely agree with what you said about the importance of not only having the right tools, but actually implementing them and using them. I think that in cybersecurity in general, but especially in identity, we've seen a lot of people that have the right solutions, but they're not fully implemented or adopted, and that effectively creates a big gap. Typically because these solutions are pretty complex, and I think part of what we'll see in the report emphasizes that. So let's go a little bit into the highlights of what you found. We'll go into a few of these different topics and see what you discovered there, and have at least some insights around it. So the first thing that we wanted to know at Silverfort is, what is the identity infrastructure that we're even trying to protect? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Is it hybrid? That was an important aspect, because we need to understand what are we all trying to secure. What have we found? What have you seen?
Well,
Michael,
what we discovered was that coverage for hybrid infrastructures was essential. Only 8.2% of the respondents to the survey were cloud only or cloud native. The vast majority, 91.8%, also had had either on-premises only or had a hybrid deployment, which encompassed solutions across all of that. So any identity security approach to deal with the issues that we explored will need to be able to handle on-premises, hybrid, and cloud-only organizations.
And that's an important thing, because a lot of times when you have a hybrid identity infrastructure, it's only as secure as the weakest link. which is often the legacy identity piece, right? Because if you compromise that, you can usually spread to the modern one, the cloud one as well. We've actually seen an interesting example of this just a few days ago. I'm sure a lot of people here heard about the breach on MGM. What happened there is the attackers were able to use social engineering to compromise the on-prem Active Directory, and then using that move to the Okta accounts. So another example out of many of how breaching into the legacy, the vulnerable identity infrastructure kind of opens the back door to the cloud identity. And I think that's the situation for many companies because the infrastructure is usually hybrid. The next thing we looked at was around MFA, right? So we wanted to understand, everybody has MFA, multi-factor authentication, I think is one of the things everybody knows that they need. But there are so many places where you would theoretically need to apply MFA if you actually want to protect all your sensitive assets. And these are just some examples here with command line tools and legacy applications and IT and OT and just so many things. So what we wanted to know, our question that we wanted Osterman's help with is how many of these things are actually protected with MFA, right? So what did we discover, Michael?
Thank you. So 66.5% of organizations were protecting less than half of the applicable resources and access methods that we asked about. On the previous slide, you showed the 11 that we queried about, and with such a high proportion not protecting the resources and access methods, this is a critical gap. Yes, organizations may have MFA for one of those types or two of those types, but unless all of them are dealt with, then there is a significant gap.
That is something that I've seen in talking to many customers over the years as one of the biggest issues, because people think about MFA as something that you just need to have MFA, check the box. Yes, I'm good, I'm covered. But the attacker actually gets to choose what they're going to connect to. So if you have MFA on the front door, but the window is open, they will just go over there. And that's the case in almost every company, right? We are seeing that very, very few people have protection on the majority of their assets, which means that an attacker that has access to your network, maybe they will not go to system A, but they can go to systems B and C. Or sometimes they will even go to system A, but instead of using a remote desktop, they will use PowerShell to log in because that interface is still unprotected. So we see this as a major issue. Now, the gaps are not only with covering resources, right? Some of them are also with which users are being protected.
Yes, that's correct. And so as you'll see on the next slide, when we asked around the percentage of users that were being protected, 34.6% said that almost everyone in their workforce was being protected. We would like to see that at 100%, but it's not. It's just over 1 out of 3. The vast majority were in this middle one here. 64.1 protected only a portion of their users or specific users. For example, admins or users with access to sensitive data. 1.3% did not have protections in place.
Yeah. It's interesting. Very few companies don't have MFA at all, as we see here, right?
Yes.
A lot of them have MFA and they feel good because they have MFA somewhere, but maybe only on some resources and some users. The next place that we looked at was PAM, right? Privileged access management, a very important control for companies to protect the crown jewels, the privileged accounts. And there the picture is even more complex, right? With what we've seen.
Yes, that's correct. And this diagram had your team and my team going back and forth quite a bit to seek to understand what this actually looked like based on the survey results. But what you can see here is that 14% of respondents said that they did not currently have PAM at their organization. 10.2% had fully deployed PAM and all privileged accounts were onboarded and protected. The vast majority, which is about 75%, were somewhere between we don't have it and it's fully implemented. Some were working through the implementation and were on track. Some were working through the implementation but were encountering difficulties. Others had encountered difficulties to such a degree that they had put the implementation on hold.
Yeah. And the fact that so many companies are somewhere in the middle there, got lost on the way or got stuck is a bit scary, right? Because this is a very important control. We've also looked at what are those challenges, right? Or are they even able to get past them, right?
Yes. And so what we found was that 73.4% lacked either the knowledge and or the resources to fully deploy PAM. 6.9% said that we're encountering difficulties that we just can't overcome. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the resources. The majority of those that we're stuck in the middle said that we know what is to be done, but we're resource constrained to do that. And that could either be cybersecurity talent to push ahead and do the work that was required, or budgetary constraints that were in place.
Very interesting. The next thing we looked at is to some people part of PAM, right? But I think it requires a special treatment just because it's such a blind spot, and that's service accounts, right? The non-human identities. And as a start, we wanted to understand if people even know about, like, where are they, what are they doing, if they even have that visibility, which is kind of the first step at securing them. And
yes, that's right. I mean, visibility is such a foundational control. If you can't see it, then you really have no clue in terms of what is going on. And service accounts that are created for good reasons at a point in time rapidly become invisible when the people that created them move on to other places or just forget about it as other responsibilities fill their plates. So you can see here that around 75% said, no, that's not 75%. Sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Just over 60% said they either had low visibility or medium visibility into service accounts. We did split out the high but incomplete from the complete visibility. So if you looked at the respondents overall, only 5.7% of respondents said we are fully up to date with every service account that we have in our organization and can see it.
Yeah, and that's very in line with what I'm hearing from customers when we talk to them. I usually, when I talk about this problem, people are, I have no idea where my service accounts are, what are they doing? It's a jungle. By the way, we're getting a lot of questions on the chat, and I don't want to save all of them for the end, even though we will have time at the end, but I want to just address one of them. Someone is asking if these numbers are based only on the survey, or are there more objective tools we use to collect logs or activities? So this is all based on the survey, right? Asking, again, 637 people that are in identity roles in different enterprises. So it's all based on their results. Again, we're getting more questions. Sorry, we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. Now, the next thing was around confidence, right? How do people feel like they can even stop some of these attacks, right? And we started from initial access.
Yes, that's right. So we asked about initial access, and then the next slide is around lateral movement. But let's just deal with initial access first. So 81.4% said that they were not highly confident that they were able to stop initial access to the resources and the access methods that we had asked about.
Yeah. And lateral movement.
And then the second one was around lateral movement. Yes, if someone does get in, how confident are you that you would be able to detect that and then stop that from proceeding to a more significant foothold or a broadening foothold across your organization? 77.6%. Again, we're not highly confident that they could do that.
Yeah. Which leads us to the reality, right? The next question was, did you actually have a data breach related to identity, right?
And 83.2% said yes, we did. 17.6% were in the last 6 months, 31% were in the previous 12 months, 34.5% were yes, we did, but it was longer than 12 months ago. So the vast majority of organizations have experienced this.
Yeah. And that's not surprising, right? Because attackers are going after identity in almost every data breach, and as we've seen, security controls are very partial. So makes sense and kind of shows us why this is a big issue. So now, next, you took all of this data and you try to work it into a maturity model, right?
Yes, that's right. As shown on the next slide, what I did was we looked at the results for each of the individual sections that we asked about. So there was MFA, there was PAM, there was service accounts, and then there was this confidence around identity resilience. And for each of those, because we had asked several questions, I did some correlations, some crosstabs, some checking to see how someone answered this question and then answered this question, and then put all of that into a 4-level maturity model so that we could say, here are the organizations that are at level 4, the highest one, which was disciplined and implemented. So they have the right solutions in place and they're optimizing their processes, their people, and the solutions that they have. And we wanted to differentiate those that had achieved this highest level of level 4 from those that were at 1, 2, or 3. The level 1s were the chaotic, where usage was ad hoc, and it was an add-on mentality in terms of solutions rather than something more specific and focused on identity security. Level 2 was around opportunistic use of the solutions that were in place. So for example, for MFA, someone may be using it just for a portion of users rather than the vast majority. It's initial steps, but the usage across the organization is uneven. And then level 3 was around identified and disciplined, where the solutions were recognized, but they were. And we tried to apply a fairly consistent and fair approach across the 4 areas that we looked at to divide each of the 637 organizations across these 4 levels. And Hed, I think it's fair to say that we also tried to not be too strict. We went back and forth on this quite a number of times to make sure that what we were going to put in the report was not impossible to achieve and attain. Level 4 is the highest that we've got here. We're not indicating that someone at level 4 is perfect in every dimension, but we have put a fair but tough requirement in order to get to that. And on the next slide, when we put all of the results from the individual areas together and looked at how many organizations had achieved either a level 3 or a level 4 across the 4 areas that we investigated, the vast majority were at level 3 or 4 in only 1 or 2 of the areas that we asked about. And the golden ticket, the 6.6% that achieved that in all 4 areas, fabulous. But the vast majority of organizations are not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have to summarize all of it briefly for the audience here, what
Thank you. So what the research showed is that the vast majority of organizations are alarmingly vulnerable to identity attacks. There are few organizations that have appropriate protections in place across the areas that we asked about in the survey to defend against attackers who have got compromised credentials, legitimate credentials that could be used by a legitimate user, but instead are being used for malicious access. Very few organizations have the ability to detect and defend against those. Yeah. And one of the outcomes that we're hoping for from this research is that security professionals in organizations will take what we have done, query themselves and their teams to say, how resilient are we? We've seen what the research says, we've seen what the snapshot of organizations across the world says. For us as an organization, where are we at and where would we fit? And therefore, by implication, what do we need to do?
And we have a lot of identity professionals here on the webinar together with us. So I want to use this chance to invite them to read the full report where you actually describe the maturity model and what can they do to actually assess their own status and understand where are the gaps. So again, great research, interesting report. We've been talking to a lot of identity professionals over the years, but this is really eye-opening. And I invite everybody to read the full report. In the next few minutes, I want to quickly show what we do at Silverfort to help with some of these issues and then open it to questions. We want to keep it short today and give people some time back, so we'll try to keep all of this to just a few minutes. So if you stay with us for a few more minutes, We'll get to a little bit of what you can do to solve these problems, and then it's time for some questions. Feel free to type them in if you want already, or when we get them. So a little bit about what are we doing to address these challenges. At Silverfort, we do something that we call unified identity protection. The idea, and this is part of our product here, is that we actually connect to all the different parts of your identity infrastructure. You can see them on the left side here, your Active Directory, your cloud identity solutions, all the different silos that don't normally work together, including the regular users and the privileged users and the service accounts. And we can look at all of them and enforce protection on all of them without having to tailor a solution one by one to each of these different islands or silos. I'm going to show you just two examples here. One is how we extend MFA to legacy environments. So for example, in this case, a command line tool, a remote PowerShell, something that doesn't support MFA. And in this quick example, I can show how we're actually using the Azure ID or Entra ID identity and the Microsoft Authenticator in order to now protect that legacy interface. So we talked earlier about the gaps in coverage of MFA. This is an example of how Silverfort helps extend MFA to basically anything. OT systems, shared files and folders, command line tools, legacy applications, and so on. The second thing is around service accounts. So we have a way to automatically discover all the service accounts. You can see here as an example, all the different non-human identities, where are they being used, sources, destinations, how many times, who's actually using them, and even the ability to protect them. So basically say, if this account only connects from A to B, we can enforce a policy on it that only allows it to connect from A to B. So even if somebody steals the credentials, they cannot use it to do anything else. They can only log in from A to B. So we really apply a least privilege approach to your service accounts, even at very large scale. We have even Fortune 50 companies using it across huge environments and hundreds of thousands of service accounts. So that's what we do very briefly. I don't want to spend too much time on it. If you want, you can, of course, see a demo of our product. There's a link here. And again, I invite you to see the full report that Osterman did here. Michael did an amazing job answering all these questions and doing much more than you've seen in this session. And now I want to use maybe just a few more minutes to open it to questions. So anyone who has questions, I know we already have a bunch in the chat, but if you have other questions, feel free. Maybe I'll pick a few of them, and Michael, feel free to jump in. But one of them, for example, is what makes PAM deployment so challenging? Because we've seen so many people are stuck on the journey, right? So why is it so challenging? I don't know, Michael, if you have any observation, like what was the kind of the top reason why people get stuck? If you have any insights on that, and I can share also from what we're seeing.
And the top reason that we saw in the survey was the lack of resources to move ahead from an initial deployment to something that was fully onboarded. And then the second one was around lack of knowledge to do something about the issues that were raised.
I think they kind of both indicate to something similar. I mean, PAM deployments are just very complex, right? We're hearing this from many companies where it taking them years to really finish that journey, if at all. Sometimes it's just a never-ending mission, because PAM deployment is complex. You need to find the accounts, onboard them, and some systems are going to break because you maybe have rotated the password that somebody's using elsewhere. And there's a lot of friction around it with the people, with the processes, application owners. By the way, that's one of the reasons why what we do at Silverfort, a lot of it is around helping you simplify that journey and make it seamless and more automatic. But yes, we are hearing this from many companies where they're kind of stuck somewhere in that journey and spending a lot of resources. And sometimes they even give up, which I think is a shame, because I think PAM is very, very important to achieve. Another question that we have here is, let's see. So around the low rate of MFA coverage. So what are some of the things that you think are critical to protect with MFA and are not being protected today. I'll say from my perspective, I think that I'm very worried about the fact that organizations can't apply MFA for command line tools, because I feel like that's what attackers use in many data breaches. They just use things like remote PowerShell and WMI and Mimikatz, right, in order to move laterally inside the network. And the fact that these tools are kind of like the secret underground highway that attackers can use to move between devices and servers, and nobody will see that. You cannot put MFA on it. That's one of the reasons why we started this company, right, in order to try to fix it. Another thing that is concerning to me from a similar perspective is around infrastructure, IT infrastructure, OT infrastructure, where it's very, very challenging to put MFA. I think in the survey, we've seen that these are some of the areas that are most lacking on MFA, right, Michael?
Yes, that's right. I mean, one of the other things that we didn't ask about in the survey is the nature of the MFA that was in place, because not all MFA is created equal. There's quite a difference between a code by SMS versus an authenticator versus a biometric read of a thumbprint or a facial scan. We didn't query that in the survey, but that would have been another dimension that would have been looked at.
Maybe we'll pick another last question. Let's see. There's a question about the methodology here. The roles that we served, right, was identity architects, was about a third of them, an identity infrastructure manager, IAM managers, director of IAM, head of IAM, and so on. And someone here is asking, why didn't we also look at C-level roles like CISO or CIO? So I can say, at least from my perspective, we really felt like there's a lot of research around what the CISOs think and the CIO thinks around the market, and we kind of wanted to really look at what identity professionals see, what is the reality, the underlying reality behind what the CIO might believe is true. But that was to me, right, Michael? I think that was the motivation there.
Yes, that was very much the idea that you brought to us, was that rather than looking at the C-level roles to get a read of what is believed to be the case, you wanted to be able to touch directly into the teams that had direct responsibility and accountability for it, because our assumption was that if we could do that, we would get a much more accurate read of the state of identity, rather than a CIO or CISO going, well, my team tells me that this is working great, to actually have the team say, well, it's not working as great as we wanted it to be, or there are some issues that we need to deal with.
I think, at least to me, there was always a feeling that if you ask the CISO or the CIO, they will tell you, oh, we're good. We have MFA, we have PAM, check. And then you talk to the team and they're like, yeah, we have it on one application, or we have it, but only 5% of our users are there. It's kind of the reality that people are not really seeing. And I think the idea here was to really do a comprehensive analysis of what the identity professionals see as the reality. And I think we have seen major gaps there between the perception and the reality, right? Which I think is important. We have many more questions, and we're continuing to get them, but I think that because we want to keep it short and bring people some time back, what I'll say is there's a very easy way to contact us, right? You can you can go to the links here, the report, the demo. If you have any questions, just reach out. You can reach out also to me and to Michael, right, on LinkedIn, and you can go to our website. Ask us those questions, read the report. It may trigger other conversations. And at least my biggest takeaway from this is, as I said, kind of behind the curtains, it's clear that identity security is very partial, very lacking and inconsistent. And I hope that people here on this call, people watching this maybe later, have those conversations internally within their own team and try to ask, do we just have these tools, or are they really fully protecting all of our critical assets? Any last takeaways from you, Michael, before we go?
Well, Hed, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to work with you on this project. It was enlightening to work it through. It was very challenging to work it through, and I appreciated the expertise of your team as we debated and wrestled with the findings that we got from the survey and how to turn that into something that was useful for the people that you were seeking to serve and help. So thank you.
No, and I want to thank you. I think when we got into this, we knew that serving so many identity professionals across so many geographies and industries and company sizes will not be easy because we're so targeted on these specific roles. I think you did an amazing job there, finding these people, having very deep conversations and actually getting us very interesting results. So thank you for great work here. And I, again, recommend to everyone to read the report. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending this time with us, and I hope this was valuable to you. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.